Sometimes our curiosity takes us to unexpected places. For Pablo Escobar,
Que Pablo Escobar era el fundador del MAS, ¿por qué no se lo había dicho al país antes?
those places were not just dark, but filled with horror and tragedy. It was a world where innocence was valued less than gold, and cruelty was as common as the sun rising. What really happened to the innocent girls whose lives were mysteriously cut short by Pablo Escobar? Join us as we unravel the tale of the 49 murdered virgins of Pablo Escobar. From humble beginnings to notorious drug lord, Pablo Escobar, one of the most notorious figures in history, was born on December 1, 1949, in the city of Rio Negro, Colombia. His father, Abel de Jesus Dari Escobar Echeverri, was a hard-working farmer who often worked on other people's farms to support his large family of 7 children. Pablo was the third child in the family. His mother, Hermilda de los Dolores Gaviria Berrio, not only raised their 7 children, but also worked as a teacher in a local elementary school. Although Pablo was born in Rio Negro, the family soon moved to Medellin when he was still young. It's interesting to note the history of Medellin, the city that would become closely associated with Pablo. The city was founded in the early 1600s by the Spanish, who established a mixed-race village there. Over the next 2 centuries, it grew steadily, becoming a regional capital in the northwest of Colombia by the time the Republic of Gran Colombia declared independence from Spain in 1819. Medellin's population grew from about 60,000 in 1905 to over 300,000 by the time Pablo was born, driven by its development as an industrial center. The city continued to grow rapidly, reaching a population of over 1 million by the time Pablo was in his early 20s. It became the industrial capital of Colombia and the second largest city in the country. Unfortunately, alongside this growth, criminal enterprises began to flourish in Medellin, taking advantage of the urban poverty that was prevalent in the city. Pablo became involved in these criminal activities, which would eventually lead to his reputation as a drug lord. When Pablo was only 14 years old, he joined a gang and was soon expelled from school. He had several run-ins with other gang members, one of which resulted in a fight with Julio Tulio Garces, which Pablo lost. However, this did not discourage him. In another disagreement, this time with Julio Gaviria, Pablo pulled out a gun and shot him in the foot. This incident was reported to the police, and Pablo spent his first few nights in a Colombian prison. Additionally, Pablo and his friends were involved in various petty crimes during their teenage years. Some accounts suggest they stole gravestones and sanded down the names to resell them as new. Others claim Pablo was involved in a scheme to sell fake high school and university diplomas. It's difficult to separate fact from fiction in these stories about his early life. The complex life of Pablo Escobar must be understood within the context of Colombia's history in the 20th century and the rise of the drug trade in the country. In many ways, politics and drugs are closely connected in modern Colombia. The country's political landscape has been dominated by 2 factions, the liberals and the conservatives, and has often been influenced by the United States. Early on, the U.S. was interested in the Isthmus of Panama for its strategic location, but this became less of a concern after Panama gained independence from Colombia. During these years, conservative politicians often aligned with American business interests, which sought to control trade in products like coffee and bananas throughout Central and South America. This led to an economy that lagged and widespread poverty. Just before Pablo's birth, Colombia saw a period of populist rule as the liberals aimed to address economic issues and redistribute wealth more equitably. However, in 1948, a year before Pablo was born, the assassination of populist politician Jorge Eliezer Gaitán sparked a rift between the liberals and conservatives, leading to a decade of civil war known as La Violencia, or the violence. Over 200,000 people were killed during this period. Eventually, the 2 factions formed a national front, with each party taking turns in power. This government, secretly supported by the U.S., began to crack down on leftist groups, particularly Leninist Marxist communist groups, to prevent Colombia from aligning with Russia, similar to Cuba. This period of political instability and violence deeply impacted Colombia, setting the stage for Pablo Escobar's rise to power in the drug trade. During the conflict in Colombia between the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia (RAFC) and the Colombian government, which began in 1964, there was a significant increase in the demand for illegal drugs worldwide, particularly in the United States and Europe. Initially, marijuana was the primary drug of choice, but cocaine soon became more profitable. Colombia's favorable environment for coca plant cultivation and the increasing lawlessness in rural areas made it a global center for cocaine production. This political and social landscape was the backdrop against which Pablo Escobar emerged in the late 1960s. Already involved in organized crime in Medellin during his late teens, Escobar pursued various criminal activities, including smuggling contraband cigarettes, engaging in grand theft auto, and later, smuggling marijuana and eventually cocaine. In the mid-1970s, Escobar became further involved in the cocaine trade through connections with smuggler Griselda Blanco, a Colombian drug lord popularly known as Black Widow. Inside Pablo Escobar's empire. At the peak of his power, Pablo Escobar's net worth, adjusted for inflation in 2012 dollars, was estimated to be an astonishing $30 billion. This figure is so vast that it's challenging to fully grasp its magnitude. To put this in perspective, in 1989, Forbes ranked him as the 7th richest person globally. If he were alive today and earning the same amount, he would be placed 18th on that list. The source of Escobar's immense wealth was the Medellin Cartel, a ruthless drug organization so extensive that it could be compared to a Fortune 500 company. At one point, the cartel even owned an entire island in the Bahamas, which they used as a refueling point for their planes smuggling cocaine from Colombia. The island had a 1-kilometer-long airstrip where they would land their large planes, transfer the cocaine onto smaller planes, and then land on remote dirt roads in southern Florida, where the cocaine would hit the streets of the United States. During their peak, the cartel was making 5 to 7 flights every day, and they even had a fleet of 2 submarines. In total, about 15 tons of cocaine were being smuggled into the United States per day. This amounted to them controlling 84 to 90% of the cocaine supply in the United States and about 80% of the total global cocaine supply. Each kilo of cocaine cost the cartel an average of $1,000 to refine and another $4,000 to smuggle into the United States. Pilots who worked for the cartel could make up to $500,000 per flight into the United States. Once the cocaine reached the streets of the United States, it could sell for anywhere between $50,000 to $70,000 per kilo. This meant that the cartel was making $60 million in revenue per day, $420 million every week, and an operating yearly income of $22 billion. The cartel was making so much money that they had to spend around $1,000 each week just on rubber bands to keep their mountains of cash organized. According to reports, they ran out of places to store their money and had to resort to stashing it in old, worn-down warehouses and even burying it in remote fields. There were reports that Escobar decided to write off 10% of their monthly revenues simply because that's about how much was being eaten by rats or damaged by water. This amounted to about $2.2 billion every year that was simply being destroyed, but it didn't affect Escobar at all. To put these numbers into perspective, the average yearly income for someone in Colombia today is $5,194. That means it would take over 4 million Colombians to match Escobar's income. In the United States, the average household income is $51,939. That means the average household would have to work for over 1,000 years to match Escobar's income. His reported net worth of $30 billion is roughly equivalent to the entire 2016 GDP of Paraguay, a country with a population of 6.7 million people. If the Medellin Cartel were an American company today, it would be the 129th largest company by yearly revenue, making more money than Starbucks, Southwest Airlines, and even Facebook. Despite his immense wealth, Escobar's empire couldn't last forever. He was responsible for an estimated 3,500 murders, including 500 police officers in the city of Medellin. Pablo Escobar's reign of terror. Pablo Escobar's era was marked by the rise of narco-terrorism, a brutal campaign of bombings, assassinations, and widespread violence aimed at maintaining his cartel's dominance. In September 1979, the Colombian government agreed to an extradition treaty with the United States under President Jimmy Carter's administration. This treaty allowed Colombian drug smugglers, who trafficked large amounts of cocaine into the U.S., to be sent there for trial and punishment. The treaty became active in March 1982, posing a serious threat to Pablo Escobar. Extradition to the U.S. would almost certainly lead to a life sentence in a high-security prison. In response to this danger in the early to mid-1980s, Escobar and his associates launched a campaign of terror, including kidnappings, murders, and bombings, targeting politicians, law enforcement officials, and judges in Colombia to pressure them into opposing the extradition treaty. One of his most shocking acts was the bombing of Avianca Flight 203, which killed all 107 passengers on board in an attempt to assassinate a presidential candidate who supported extradition. Despite their efforts, the fear of extradition remained a constant concern for traffickers like Escobar throughout the 1980s. If Escobar were to be arrested and tried in Colombia, the widespread corruption in the country would likely result in him escaping punishment or facing only lenient sentences. To counter the extradition threat, Escobar sought to build support among Colombians. He cultivated an image of himself as a modern-day Robin Hood, portraying his criminal activities as harmless to ordinary Colombians. Many believed that any harm caused by his actions was only felt in the United States, which was seen by some as an oppressive force in Latin America. Escobar further softened his image by generously distributing money earned by the cartel to the people of Medellin and funding various public projects, including stadiums, parks, and community facilities. At one point, he even opened the zoo at Hacienda Nápoles to the public free of charge. However, his conflict with the Colombian government reached its peak with the siege of the Colombian Supreme Court in 1985, resulting in the death of half of its judges. In 1991, under mounting pressure, Escobar surrendered to Colombian authorities. However, his imprisonment was quite funny. He was confined to a luxurious prison he built himself, La Catedral, which had amenities like a casino, spa, and nightclub. He continued to control his empire from prison until his escape in 1992, which triggered a nationwide manhunt. Pablo Escobar's dark obsession. Escobar, known for his numerous lovers, married Maria Victoria Henao soon after they met. They remained together until Pablo's death. Despite his reputation, Maria was recognized as his wife and the mother of his children. However, there's a darker side to Pablo's relationships. He had a strong attraction to young girls, particularly those in their early to mid-teens, which was against the law and deeply troubling. Even before marrying Maria, Pablo had a preference for young girls whom he believed were virgins, and this preference only intensified as he grew older and richer. Maria recalls meeting Pablo for the first time when she was just 12 years old and he was 23. Despite the age gap, Pablo worked hard to win her over, and Maria remembers him as kind, loving, and a gentleman. Maria was drawn to Escobar because of his kindness and his genuine desire to help people in need, although it's fair to say that he also took advantage of her. Despite objections from her family, Maria remained committed to Pablo. They became sexually involved when Maria was only 14, resulting in her pregnancy. Pablo promptly took her to an abortion center, demonstrating his control over their relationship. Maria married Pablo at the age of 15, and she remembers their wedding night as one of the happiest moments of her life. Little did she know that it marked the beginning of Pablo's disturbing attraction to teenage girls. Maria herself was the first young girl to fulfill Pablo's dark desires. As Pablo's criminal activities expanded, it became widely known that he had a preference for girls between the ages of 14 and 17, and he would go to great lengths to satisfy this preference. Pablo Escobar had a particular preference for his victims. They had to be young, inexperienced, and meet certain physical criteria, such as being petite, delicate, and having long legs. His fixation on finding such victims grew because he couldn't easily wander the streets seeking prey. To capture these young, innocent girls, Pablo devised a cunning plan. He recruited a group of charming young men, known whose main task was to find and seduce these girls. Their ultimate goal? To bring them to Pablo's bed. They specifically targeted girls from poor neighborhoods, where families struggled financially. They lured these girls with promises of a better life. Some were offered motorcycles, while others were promised cars. The allure of transforming their families' fortunes by spending time with the boss of the Medellin Cartel was irresistible. The handsome young men flaunted bundles of cash, knowing that money alone could persuade the girls to sleep with Pablo. Pablo generously funded his recruiters to ensure their success. While money played a crucial role in attracting the girls, Pablo's reputation as an ideal husband, devoted father, and passionate lover also captivated them. Some girls even dreamed of finding love with the drug lord and becoming queens in his empire. Innocence lost, and society's judgment. Luxury for the innocent girls came at a cost. Becoming part of Escobar's world often involved a violent loss of innocence, a harsh reminder of their weakness and Escobar's absolute authority. The impact on these young girls was deep and lasting. Many found themselves trapped in a cycle of fear, dependency, and abuse, with no way out. Their stories, often overlooked, serve as powerful reminders of the human toll of Escobar's rule. This dark side of Escobar's life also reflects the societal norms of Colombia at that time, where the worth of young women was often judged by their purity and beauty. In this context, Escobar's actions, though extreme, were an exaggerated version of existing societal biases and power dynamics. The irony of Escobar's fixation on innocence was its stark contrast to his own life. A man who built a criminal empire through violence and intimidation, yet sought purity and innocence in his relationships, presents a complex psychological profile. Through these young girls, Escobar seemed to be seeking a form of purity in a life that was otherwise filled with corruption. When he wanted to hire these girls, he took them to his luxurious home in El Poblado, a posh area of the city. The house was lavishly furnished, creating the perfect setting for Pablo's gatherings with his friends and the young girls. These events were filled with many girls, delicious food, fine drinks, and lively music. Although Pablo enjoyed the company of these young girls, it was evident that he had a deeper interest in them beyond just their physical appearance. John Gairo Vasquez, also known as Pape, Pablo's closest friend and hitman, confessed that Pablo had a nosing side. Pape revealed that Pablo was fascinated by watching women engage in sexual acts. Sometimes, he would even arrange for straight women to be with gay men and watch as the women reached their climax. However, Pablo's sexual interests were not limited to this. According to Pape, Pablo kept a briefcase filled with various pleasure toys that he would use when he wanted to watch lesbians engage in sexual activities. Pape also mentioned that any gang member could join the orgies, but Pablo was very private and would reserve a specific room for his more intense nights. Despite his wild behavior, Pablo never involved his wife in these activities, as he cherished her dearly. Now it's time for today's subscriber pick. In the bustling streets of Medellin, Colombia, there lived a young girl named Maria. She was just 15 years old, with dreams of a better life. But her life took a dark turn when she crossed paths with Pablo Escobar, the notorious drug lord. Maria was lured into Escobar's world with promises of wealth and luxury. She was taken to his lavish mansion, where she was introduced to a life of richness. But behind the facade of wealth and power, there was a sinister truth. Escobar had a dark obsession with young girls, particularly those who were virgins. He would hold lavish parties, where he would invite his friends and the young girls he had lured into his web. These parties were a cover for something much more evil. Escobar's true intentions were revealed when the girls were found brutally murdered. Their bodies were discovered in different parts of Medellin, their innocence stolen from them most in a horrific manner. Maria was one of the lucky ones. She managed to escape from Escobar's clutches before it was too late, but the memories of what she had witnessed haunted her every day. The story of the 49 murdered virgins of Pablo Escobar sent shockwaves through Colombia. It forced the nation to confront the dark underbelly of the drug trade and the devastating consequences of one man's ambition. Maria's story is just one of many. The survivors, though scarred by their experiences, have shown remarkable resilience. Their stories, marked by horror and strength, offer a rare glimpse into the terror of Escobar's world. The legacy of Escobar's reign is a gripping reminder of the cruelty of unchecked power and the weakness of innocence. It is a story that will forever be etched in the records of history, a reminder of the human toll of the drug trade. The tragic mystery of Medellin's missing girls. Pablo Escobar was known for his love of women and his willingness to spend lavishly on their entertainment. Yet the city of Medellin was unprepared for the horrors that would unfold. Residents were shocked to discover the cold, ruthless side of Pablo when he unleashed his violence on young girls. The year was 1987, and the city was plunged into darkness for 3 days as the bodies of 49 girls began to appear in various parts of Medellin. Some of the girls had been brutally tortured, while others were found dismembered with bullet holes riddling their bodies. The Colombian police, led by Commander Hugo Heliodoro Aguilar Nanjo, immediately took over the case, determined to uncover the truth behind these horrific murders. As the investigation progressed, it became evident that Pablo Escobar was the prime suspect. Known for his preference for virgins, Pablo was notoriously difficult to track down. Commander Aguilar was convinced that Pablo was responsible for the girls' deaths, but the question remained: why? Despite Pablo's public image as a devoted husband and lover, the police were determined to uncover the truth. Through careful detective work, they identified 2 possible motives for the murders. Initially, it was believed that the young girls were being interrogated by members of the Medellin Cartel, known as the Men of the Medellin Cartel. However, when the girls couldn't provide any useful information, they were brutally murdered. The second theory suggested that Pablo, fearing capture, suspected that one of the girls had disclosed his whereabouts to the police. Instead of torturing the girls to identify the informant, Pablo, acting as a ruthless killer, decided to eliminate any potential witnesses. One of Pablo's hitmen revealed that Pablo believed it was preferable to have a dead girlfriend than a living witness who might betray him to the police for a reward. Pablo carefully considered his options and concluded that surrendering was the best course of action. Tragically, his decision led to the deaths of innocent people and caused immense pain to their families. In 1991, several years after the massacre, a courageous survivor spoke to the local newspaper El Tiempo, shedding light on some of the mysteries surrounding the events. To protect her identity and safety, the survivor chose to remain anonymous, fearing retribution from the Medellin Cartel. The newspaper took precautions to safeguard her identity, as Pablo was known for his harsh treatment of those who spoke out against him. The survivor's account provided investigators with vital new information about Pablo's true nature, his treatment of the girls brought to him, and the dynamics of his sex parties. Her testimony was a crucial development in the investigation, offering valuable insights into Pablo's criminal activities and his involvement in the deaths of the young girls. Echoes of innocence. This tragic event prompted the nation to reflect on its values and norms, questioning how such terrible acts could happen. Even years later, the massacre of these young girls remains a dark and painful part of Colombia's history. It serves as a chilling reminder of the human toll of the drug trade and the devastating consequences of one man's ambition. The stories of these girls caught up in the chaos of Escobar's empire continue to echo, a solemn reminder of the cruelty of unchecked power and the weakness of innocence. The survivors' accounts, set against the backdrop of Pablo Escobar's ruthless rule, where many young lives were lost, are proof of human resilience. Their stories, marked by horror and strength, offer a rare glimpse into the terror of Escobar's world. Those who miraculously survived, mostly young women who narrowly escaped death, carry not only physical scars, but also deep emotional wounds. Their narratives are more than just tales of survival. They are testimonies to the lasting effects of trauma. Each story is unique, but shares a common thread of fear, betrayal, and the loss of innocence. For these survivors, life under Escobar was like a constant dance with death. Some recall watching their friends being brutally murdered, forced to keep quiet, or face the same fate. Others talk about the daily fear of living under Escobar's control, knowing that any day could be their last. When survivors managed to escape, it was often just as terrifying as being held captive. Some fled during police raids, while others were let go when they were no longer useful to Escobar. These escapes weren't just about getting away physically, they were about trying to find themselves again. Getting back into society was hard for the survivors. People saw them as being connected to Escobar, and they were deeply affected by what they'd been through. Many found it tough to go back to normal life. Some had mental health problems, and others were rejected by their families and communities. A lot of survivors chose to stay quiet, trying to forget about a past that was too painful. This silence was often forced on them by the shame of being part of Escobar's world, a label that was hard to shake. For some, it meant living a life without being known, always haunted by their memories. Many survivors of Escobar's reign kept their stories to themselves, afraid to share. But for those who found the courage to speak, support from others was crucial. Some found comfort in family and friends, while others sought help from support groups and counseling. These support systems were not just comforting, but also important for their journey to heal and recover. Many survivors wanted justice, not just for Escobar, but for everyone involved in the terrible things that happened. However, in a system full of corruption and fear, real justice was often hard to find. This left many survivors feeling angry and sad, with no closure. Despite the terrible things they went through, many survivors showed incredible strength. Their stories are not just about being victims, but also about being strong and resilient. Some even became advocates for other victims of violence, using their own experiences to help others. The stories of the survivors are an important part of the story of Escobar's reign. They show the real human cost of the drug trade, and they challenge us to look beyond the excitement of Escobar's life to see the real impact of what he did. As the investigation went on, people in Colombia learned more about the terrible things that happened under Escobar's rule. This made people feel a mix of anger, fear, and sadness. It made them think about the bad side of the narco culture that was part of their society. Getting justice for the girls who were killed was hard. The legal system in Colombia was full of problems like corruption and threats, which made it hard to punish the people responsible. The few trials that did happen were often unfair, with threats and other problems, showing how hard it was to get justice in Colombia. The media played a big part in the investigation and what happened after. Reporters, even though it was dangerous, told the stories of the victims, making sure people didn't forget about the need for justice. But the media also made people think about the right way to talk about violence and people who are hurt. Pablo Escobar's death in 1983 brought some closure, but it didn't answer all the questions or solve all the crimes. After he died, there was more fighting among the different groups in the cartel trying to take control. The terrible story of the 49 girls who were murdered is a big part of Colombia's history. People around the world started to see Colombia as a place with a lot of drug trafficking and violence because of Escobar. This made it harder for Colombia to have good relationships with other countries, trade, and tourism. Colombia has been working hard to change this image and show people its culture, history, and how much it has to offer. The story of Escobar has also made people in Colombia think more about how to heal and make peace. It's important to remember the victims, including the young girls, and support their families. Colombia is trying to do this by having memorials, talking about what happened, and helping survivors and their families. This is all part of Colombia's journey to deal with its past and move forward. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.